back to the late 1860s up to 1936, and this would have been a fantastic site. We're looking down now where the tubs used to come through from Swinshaw Colliery. The empties had come through the drift here that ran through to Nodlock Cabin. They'd run under the gantry, and you can see now the shaft's been, well, the coal authority's been up with their timbers making it stable. That's where the main shaft was. That's 140 feet deep, 10'6" diameter. It is filled in. People think that it isn't, they're just nettles, but it's well and truly filled in, I can guarantee. And we used to be able to see the sides of the shaft. To the right of me here, you can see the main winding engine bed for the shaft winder. And to the left, you can see some bolts sticking out on a slab. Well, across there was a ginny wheel. There was a big girder across where we're stood with a big wheel, and the haulage chain that took the tubs through to Swinshaw Colliery and then down to Crawshire Booth was situated there, and the tubs ran through into this drift. So there's a big gantry over the pit top to protect the men working there from the weather. And then just off to the right there we can see the winding man's house. That's where he used to live. And behind the shaft there used to be the manager's office and the men's cabin. Let's have a closer look round the pit top. So we've come up the pit road and in through the pit gates. We've got the boiler house there to one side of us. There's 2 Lancashire boilers there. 2 Lancashire boilers and a small boiler as well to get things going. And as we pan round, you can see the remains of the chimney on the hill. And this was the winding engine house, obviously, because you've got the engine bed there. The winder was above. Now the shaft winder was actually slightly offset from the pulley wheels. And if you look at the photographs of the pit, we can see that there's a couple of pulleys set up to make things align. And that's where the drift was that went through to Swinshaw Colliery. I did used to have a sketch of the place, and I'm taking it that it was done off what Father Steenie said. And the winding house obviously had big, well, it had big windows there for the winder to see. The winder, for most of the pit's life, was called Harvey Orty. Also the boiler room there was a favourite place for the men to leave their wet clothes as well, if they've got damp coming to work or they've been working in a wet place. And we've also got an original photograph taken here round about the year 1914 that shows the men and boys that worked at the pit. And where they're crouched is in front, nearly, well, it's in the stockyard, at the side of the manager's office, and also at the side of the house. And if you look on that picture, you'll see one of the men that's actually on the extreme right. Hopefully you can see the picture, and you can see an archway there. Well, that archway is that gap in the wall. We'll tell you more about that later. And to the side, we've got the house, the remains of the house. That was one of the windows. How would you like that for a view? You can see the stone lining of the shaft. The shaft was 10'6" diameter, and it's 144 feet deep down to the lower mountain mine, which was about 2'6", 2'8". There was 2 cages, and each cage was just big enough for 3 men and 1 tub. We don't have any photos showing the cages here, but we do have photographs showing cages at Grindbridge Colliery that were exactly the same. Now the top of the shaft used to be kept fenced off, actually, with wood nailed to some wooden pillars, and at night time the cages were left suspended in the shaft. Now, as the pit was running, the length of time that it used to take to wind 1 tub to the surface was just about the correct distance to put it straight onto the haulage chain, because you didn't put all the tubs on the chains next to each other. They were spaced out so the chain didn't drag. When he put a full and on, he would catch an empty and put that in the cage and send that down the pit. Usually there'd be standard, what we call stanners on the pit top. There'd be plenty of spare tubs on the pit top. And thankfully for the men up here, they weren't working in the open air. Behind the shaft here, there was, first of all, we had the men's cabin, and that wasn't very big, and it had wooden seats all round, and it had nails knocked into the wall and a fire going in there, so the men could leave their going home coats, and if they left any pit gear there at night, usually they went home in all the gear, or perhaps they might hang a coat up in the boiler house, and if they came and it was wet, they'd probably hang their coats up in the boiler house. Next to the men's cabin was the manager's office. Now, he had the luxury of a telephone after a certain date. He had a fireplace and a desk, and also in his fire he had a little oven, so he could make himself something to eat or warm his bait up, and also I'm told that he allowed the surface workers to warm some bait as well. So it wasn't a very big pit top, but it was functional. I'm stood in a hot shop at present. That's where the smithy was. Every pit needs a smithy. There's always plenty of metal work to do. All the mending of the tubs, although they could really have been perhaps mended down at Crosherbooth Staithe. There was all the work that needed doing anyway. And most importantly of all, every day the colliers needed the picks sharpened. You don't sharpen them on a grindstone. It's a blacksmith that sharpens a collier's hand picks. So that's where the smithy was. Now, next to the smithy was that archway that I pointed out earlier on. You might wonder what that's for. It's on that photograph. Now, there was another surface haulage that left the pit top, went through that archway, and it went down to a drift into the upper mountain mine. Now, I've no date whatsoever for when that drift was running, but it had a double track haulage running to it, and we're not even sure at present where the haulage was. At one time, John used to think that it went right down to the pumping pit, but it doesn't. It's just a district in the upper mountain mine that it worked. Next to the archway, we come to the house, which for most of the pit's life, certainly up until 1911, was occupied by the Orties. Harvey Orty was the winding engine man here. I don't know after 1911 because that's the last census so far that we can find. But his living room was here, and it had a window looking out over the pit top. Hey, who wouldn't want a view like that? And a window looking out the back onto the fields. And I am told that at one time there was a doorway out, perhaps into this archway here. And that's another thing during the day. You got a ginnyway going by the side of the wall. At least it stops at night. That's the Orties' living room. And you get an idea of the view they'd have had through the front window. There's a really interesting tale about the Orties as well. But we'll just do a tour of the rest of the house. Obviously next door is the kitchen. And here we've got the kitchen. I'm told the house was lovely and cosy. Great big fire in the living room, and in the kitchen there was a big kitchen range, and at one side of the kitchen range was a hot water boiler, and the other side was a hot air oven. So even though we were right up on the moors, it does seem that most of the house was nice and cosy. Most of the house. For the most part the house was nice and cosy, but at one time the upstairs was a little bit of a different matter. It had a bit of a leaky roof, and by all accounts one day Mr. Orty went in to see the manager and says, "Hey, the roof's leaking, there's water dripping in on the bed." So the manager, in true industrial Scrooge-like Lancashire fashion, said, "Why, what they moidering about? Shift the bed." These are the remains of the pit lodge. Wonder if they ever went swimming there. And this is a classic shot relay of the pit, of the original photograph we've got. And really, it's a fantastic site. It's one of the most complete sites there is. Grieve was a bit more complete until it got bulldozed down. And this is slowly going back to nature. I mean, this actually is the place where I first got interested in coal mining. Me and my dad came for a walk here about 1978. I didn't know it existed. We used to spend hours on these moors playing when we were kids, as I suppose did most kids who were brought up in Loughclough and Crosherbooth. But Father brought us here for a walk, and I was hooked on mining from then. Now also, I'm talking about walking, it's also said that Mrs. Horty used to make and sell ice cream to walkers as they came past, and that's one thing that one or two farms did. I think Stephen Oldfield said it, his grandparents, their farm on the other side of the hill there near Nodlock, next to Gibble Lane, they used to make teas for walkers. A little bit of a side trade, wasn't it? I thought it'd be good to finish this off, the Gambleside story in the village itself. And one of the notice boards that they put up as this place became popular to walkers, sadly it's getting decayed now. Like many of these things the groundwork did, well, all good intentions, nobody seems to want to fund them anymore. Remember, coal mining round here wasn't just Gambleside Colliery. If we look across in the distance, Cotton Row, the other side of the road, that was working long before Swinshaw started working. So perhaps people from the village associated that more for a start with the coal mining. And don't forget, the reservoir wasn't there then, was it, to stop them walking across. Gambleside itself closed in 1936. The shaft had actually, even the winding pit had closed 5-6 years before that, and the area they were then working was where they'd been in the 1860s, back in the tunnel between Gambleside and Nodlock Cabin. So the pit was on its last legs anyway, really, and its main customer was then Sunnyside Printworks. And don't forget the 1930s, big trade depression, lots of places had closed. Just across the valley, Goodshire Hill Colliery had closed in 1932. And sadly in 1936, Sunnyside Printworks had a big fire and burnt down. So there was nowhere then to sell the coal, and Gambleside was on its last legs anyway, so the pit closed. Well, hopefully, now I am hoping, I haven't arranged it proper, that we're going to go and see later on the last man alive that ever went down Gambleside Colliery. And his dad worked here, Steenie Spencer, and Steenie remembers coming up as a young lad bringing his father's bait, and the fireman asked his father, "Does I think I can look after him for a day?" So Steenie went down with his father for the afternoon, and Steenie later became a drawer up at NAB. In fact, when Gambleside closed, his father went to NAB, and the whole family, because he had 3 brothers at least, Steenie, 2 or 3 brothers, and they were all in the pit, and they all went up to NAB Colliery. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this short history about Gambleside and Swinshaw Collieries, so that next time you walk the moors, you'll understand what went on here a little bit more. I know there's no big adventures that occurred, but still, it's Rossendale mining history, and it's a big part of Hargreaves Colliery's history as well. See you next time.